Scene 4. New York has been destroyed. Meanwhile, Manhattan is suspended in the sky. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 The Manhattan Project. In the last part we started off the game and now we're in Stage 4. Which on first inspection seems very dangerous because the lower 2/3 of the playable area is gone. That's only like that for about the first 10 seconds. Stage 4 is where the game's levels tend to get a bit longer. We did 3 levels last part, but we're not doing that again the entire LP. And it's not just like in terms of pure level design, sometimes it's a shorter physical level, but there's just a lot more enemies in your path. Ultimately, I don't think many of the game's levels do a lot to justify that length, though, unless you're playing on 2-player. Manhattan Project is definitely a game that's length is less out of innovation and things to do and more so almost out of obligation because it's the relatively standard 8 levels long, which it just feels like a round number to have for a beat-em-up in general. With that said, let's get into some more interesting things. This game was developed by Konami, of course, as they developed basically all the games for this franchise until at least, I think they just stopped being the main developer around the 2003 show for the license, where I think Midway took over for a bit, I want to say. I forget who developed Battle Nexus. But the Japanese version of this game's got a lot of little extra hidden bells and whistles in cheat codes. For instance, there's an exclusive cheat code to that version, where at the top screen you'd press A, B, right, left, down, up, and start, so the inverse Konami code. And you can increase your continues beyond the standard 3. And I want to see on the options screen, which we accessed last part, you can also see a thank you message there in the Japanese version. And I actually forgot to mention last part, that's not just like a normal options screen, where you can increase your life count. That's also a stage select. The first option there, I went with the normal one last time, but you could start all the way in the last level by doing that. Which, hey, cool, if you get a game over, like a real one, that's a good way to go about it. Something I do find interesting, though, since if memory serves, this was developed and published by Konami here in the States, when they were going by Konami, no longer under the Ultra Games label. Both the Japanese and US ROMs have the other version inside of them that you can access by messing with some behind-the-scenes coding thing. I just find it funny more than anything. In fact, if memory serves, this game isn't even called Turtles 3 in Japan. This is Turtles 2. And I forget if Turtles 1 in that case is, well, Turtles 1 or Turtles 2. I want to say it's Turtles 1 because I don't think the arcade game was released there, period. Because if memory serves, the NES games were released over there before, like, the actual show were, for the most part. I know there's a lot of weird history when it comes to, like, TMNT releases. Like, obviously, one of the more famous cases, due to some EU rules about certain words being used in titles, they had to rename the entire franchise to Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles in Europe, which... TMNT is already a very silly title, but something about the placement of the word hero there is just so much sillier. Maybe it's just because ninjas are inherently cooler, maybe it's because it just phonetically flows off the tongue more. At the same time, though, I've also literally been raised with this series existing, so it might just be a fact that I'm more used to it overall. I guess on that note, I do find it interesting, having only recently finished Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's the only series since the 80s one that has a certain level of silliness to it, because the series tried to take itself very seriously, I find, through the 2000s into 2010s. 2012 noticeably less so than 2003 as a show, but definitely took itself more seriously, and I honestly really appreciate the silliness for Turtles. The slight self-aware factor, even if it still has a very serious storyline like Rise does when it actually gets going. It's a nice blend of tones, I find. I'm really curious what they're going to do next with the franchise, though, after Rise was clearly not espionage, sabotaged by higher-ups and the corporations not liking either things they were doing or not liking how well it wasn't doing with certain fan bases. I guess we'll see in probably a year, 2 years, I'd assume. We'll probably see another series after they realize they want to sell more toys again. It's like TMNT, Power Rangers, and Transformers are franchises that have genuinely good storytelling here and there, but are entirely driven by people wanting a big chunk of that toy sales. In fact, now I think about it, we had all 3 of those in my house growing up because my brother was like literal prime market audience as he was growing up for all 3 of those. I mean, so was I, because I grew up watching 2003 and the Disney-era Power Rangers, and... Yeah, Transformers Armada I watched a lot of, even though I look back at that show very negatively, barring Starscream. And now that I think about it, all 3 of those have really successful comic books. Obviously, in that case, Turtles is a little bit of a standout because it started as comics before the show happened. In fact, I now like to joke that people often bring up Batman and Spider-Man as the comic books with the best batting average for games. Turtles had a complete era of it in the 90s and the early 2000s. Even into the early 2000s now I think about it. Because the early 2003 games I remember really liking. I'm not sure if they were any deep if I went back to them nowadays, but I remember liking them. And that game that Platinum did for the IDW comics I heard was alright. Not great, just alright, but that was a lot of what was going on with those licensed games they were doing at that era. And based off how Babylon's Fall was, might be a bit of a trend for them the past decade now I think about it. In fact, I think I've told this story on one of the Turtles playthroughs before, but just in case I haven't. My first exposure to the Turtles comics outside of some of the small ones I think they did for the 2003 show here and there was at my local library. They had a lot of comic books that you could rent there, especially in the trades, not just the floppies. And I also got a lot of games there, rented them. That's how I played Destroy All Humans, for instance, via their PS2 collection. And it was a very big wake-up call for, oh, these comics are not just dark like I've heard, they are super dark, because it was a specific trade that had the storyline where Donatello fought the, like, super traditional Hebrew folklore version of the golems. And that issue ends with the golem committing suicide by changing the letter on its forehead, and that was a moment to see as a, I was probably like 9 years old at that point, and oh, the boss missed us, whoops. This is Dirtbag. Dirtbag has the potential to be one of the harder bosses in the game, because he's got a lot of attacks, honestly. He can charge at you with his pickaxe, attacking all the way down. He can fire his forehead lasers at you. He can do the usual wake-up attacks to try and get out of any combo you're doing to him. The big problem he has, though, when it comes to his pattern, is that you can jump on the lower third of the screen down there, and he will automatically follow you down there and back up should you go up and down. So if you're having some trouble finding him, just use his own jump against him because he's very vulnerable right after he lands on either platform. You could also use that as a way to gain some distance by jumping diagonally, just get out of the way. Scene 5, going underground due to this dangerous sewer. I didn't read the rest of that, but oh well, I think it's something about the Technodrome. So you guys like sewer levels? No? Okay. Sewer levels are such a bizarre thing in games to me, because they're so consistently the same thing. And I can't help but wonder if it's because a lot of developers feel like it's needed to find a way to get from one place to another. I never really mind them outwardly myself when it comes to, like, actually playing through them compared to some people. Like, them in ice levels I never really freak out about. It's always, like, weird gravity levels or darkness levels that I freak out about. Underwater levels especially, also I don't really mind, because my major exposure to a lot of those mechanics for the first time were Mega Man games, and Mega Man games don't exactly do a lot of the same things that other games do for those particular genres. For instance, a lot of other games, their sewer levels, you move really slow in the water and it's a trudge, but in Mega Man games, like, your horizontal movement's the same, but you get that nice floaty jump. That means they can make some very different platforming in it. I guess it is a thing of, like, what you do first with a certain subject can really color your experience with it. And Mega Man was where I was exposed to a lot of particular mechanics first. Thank you, Mega Man X. I guess thinking about it, though, something that the NES Turtles games don't exactly do that well, at least when it comes to the beat-em-up ones, is having, like, hazard variety, usually. Like, other beat-em-ups on the NES, like Double Dragon, I remember Bayou Billy having a lot of this, things of that nature. Usually there's a lot more platforming involved in their levels. The Turtles games, you have a jump, but it's mostly for the actual combat. There's very little actual platforming in these games. And I feel like that's where beat-em-ups can really shine when it comes to making the levels stand apart from each other. and you just don't get any of that here. Not that that's an inherent problem, like Streets of Rage, at least Streets of Rage 2, doesn't really have a lot of platform. Now there's the first one from memory. But they still have things that make the levels stand out from each other, namely unique enemy varieties. And the Turtles games tend to just have a lot of the same things, really. We still get some new enemies here and there, like they're actually coming up on a new enemy relatively shortly. But a lot of it's like 90% foot soldier. But I digress. Going back to the manual, though, the last level's little bio is Welcome to the Jungle. Alleys, garages, and subway platforms, guard down for a second or you'll be street slime. Although there's not really many cars that can run you down that compared to some other beat-em-ups. And this is the sewer pipe nightmare. The sewer passageways are like a maze. Pretend there's pizza waiting at the other end for added incentive. Okay. That reminds me, I really did like how for the Cowabunga collection, or was it, I forget if it was that or Shredder's Revenge, actually. They ended up doing the whole Pizza Hut certificate thing again. That was a nice little throwback. Oh, also new enemy, here's Mousers. They only take one hit to take out in this particular game, but they're pretty annoying in that they can outwardly grab you out of some attacks outside of your throw. So interacting with them in any of the games is kind of annoying because of that. Using your specials or throws can only help so much because they don't really tend to throw Mousers at you with enemies that you can throw. If there's an instance they do that and it's only like 1 or 2 times, period. But get used to a Mouser because it's time for a mini-boss. This is the Mother Mouser. It's big, it's blue, and it's got a foot soldier on it. And it's really easy, honestly. For like the first 2/3 of its health, it's really easy to get it into a jump attack lock. But if you let it stand still for too long, it'll not only start firing projectiles, but it can spawn actual Mousers that just serve to clutter up the battlefield. Doesn't have a lot of health, but I also did get a lot of hits in a row with that jump attack combo. Again, I appreciate this game after the first few stages actively throwing more mini-bosses at you, because I feel like that's something even Turtles in Time and its compatriot we might be tackling relatively soon. Kind of lack. They only really give you bosses at the actual end of the stage. That's a really unfortunate way to die. Because it helps, like, not divide up the stage, but compartmentalize, I guess, in my brain how a stage flows from one half to another. That's honestly why I like Mega Man mini-bosses, as way too beefy as they can be sometimes. I'm looking at you, Mega Man 4's Hippo. On another topic, though, this is a game I actually meant to do a lot earlier in some regards. There's quite a few games I always originally wanted to do as 2-player LPs, namely with my buddy Scott. But ever since we moved, me and him meeting up is going to be a lot harder to do even for our own time, let alone anything for the channel. So this is just one of those I finally went, alright. So, if there's any games I wanted to do as 2-player games, don't be surprised if you just show up, finally. Mario 3 was that, Gunstar was that. Let me actually take a look here at my little notebook. What else was marked down as 2-player? On this, like, first page over here. Double Dragons, like that. Actually, is that literally all of them? I probably had others here and there. Thankfully, they give you a health restore here because this stage is long and the boss fight's even kind of long itself. Also, the dripping water sound effect reminds me a lot of Mega Man 2. Boss of this stage is good old Leatherhead. Leatherhead works very similarly to Rocksteady in that he's got a gun that he can shoot and it's a giant spread wave that actively aims upward to try and counter your jumps. But he'll also counter even your jump kicks and normal attacks with that tail spin. So you want to go in for a shot and then get immediately out. You can do this sort of with jump kicks by jumping into his hitbox and immediately jumping outwards for another jump kick in the opposite direction, or even through him again if you go far enough away. But he also likes to just do minor backdashes to try and surprise you with a gunshot. Your special attack can be pretty good to help avoid a lot of this and also cause some damage along the way. But compared to some of the prior bosses, Leatherhead can definitely keep you on your toes, which is a little bit funny to me because I find him to usually be one of the easier bosses if he shows up in other games. Especially looking at, yeah, he's pretty easy in Turtles in Time now I think about it, even though he's one of the later game bosses there. And the next game we're doing, he's especially easy. But it's like he's the first level boss there. You can also see me just slowly giving up on any kind of subtlety with some of these boss fights as I get lower on health and just start spamming the special attack. Dominant strategy be dominant strategy. But eventually, he goes down, and the stage ends kind of anticlimactically, honestly. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're going to go raid ourselves the Technodrome. See you guys then.